Hi, I'm Judy. Welcome to Go With Yin Yoga, especially if you're a new member and even more especially if you've been with me for a while. Really appreciate you practicing yoga with me, giving me likes, subscribing to this channel. The likes help me to reach a wider audience, and that is why I'm on YouTube, to bring Yin Yoga to more people. I'm switching things up a little bit as, I grow and evolve, and that is actually what February is kind of all about. So this is February 2023, and there will be good information for you even if you are watching this at a later date. So I'm going to talk about what's being released to the channel this month. We have 4 practices, not 5, 4. It's a short month. And meridian-wise, they are aiming towards spleen and stomach, and that is about energy and digestion, not just physical digestion, but also digesting our thoughts and our emotions. And we're also doing some kidney and bladder work as well. We're not concentrating on the meridians as much as I have been in the last couple of months, and I'll get to that in a minute. So the kidney and bladder, that connects to our water element, and that is the element associated with winter. If you're in the northern hemisphere like I am, you are dealing with winter right now. So we have 4 practices, and basically what I'm doing with those, I took some of the practices that were popular when I first started this channel a bit over 3 years ago, and I reworked them. Because, 3 years is a long time. I've learned new things. I'm always learning. I'm evolving as a teacher and as a person. So I took some of these and I was like, oh, people like that flow. And I'm like, oh, goodness, that can be better. So some of them are unrecognizable, even though they have the same effect. And some of them are similar to the originals. And it really isn't going to matter which you do. It only matters about what works for you. Okay. These practices are really great for runners because we're working on our entire posterior chain and a lot of them. And that means our feet, our knees, our hamstrings, our hips, our glutes, our low back. Not all of them, but a lot of them do happen to deal with our posterior chain. And we're also working on digestion. And a lot of runners really struggle with digestion, and a lot of runners, as we get older, struggle with digestion even if they never had problems with it before. So that's a good thing to work on. Okay. And there is one practice that will focus on your adrenals. And there's another one that will also work on shoulder and neck tension. That's been very popular on the channel as well, and I totally understand why. That's where I put my stress. I can tell you that right now. Okay, so that's what's coming this month. But I also wanted to touch on something else. Someone commented in a group that I'm in just the other day about how modifications weren't serving her and she needed to challenge herself more. And maybe that's true. I don't know her. But I just wanted to touch on that and say I love modifications and I love props. You will notice I have a lot of props here. One of the things I think I'm going to do going forward is not tell you what props you need for the practice you'll be doing. It will always be in the description box below. There's a lot of stuff in that description box. I really highly suggest that you take a glance at it at least. But right now, I'm going to go over the ones that I suggest you should bring to pretty much every practice. You may or may not need them for pretty much every practice, but they're great to have on hand. Blocks. Always have a couple of blocks with you. You never know when you might need one. There are different kinds of blocks, as I'm illustrating right here. There are foam blocks. Foam blocks are really heavy and they're really sturdy, and they're great for doing things like taking the place of a bolster if you don't have one. They're very good for that. And they're also, like if you're doing squat pose, a deep squat basically, and it's a little too difficult for you, sitting on this can make it very accessible for most people who don't have knee problems. And it's just really sturdy. Once you get on it, you're not going to fall off it. While the foam blocks, which are underneath, I also suggest those. Um, I really don't know which I would suggest if you can only buy one pair, quite frankly. I mean, I had foam blocks only for years, decades, I don't know, probably decades. So maybe the foam blocks, they're readily available, they're cheaper, but I really like the cork. But foam is good to be more comfortable. Like if you're using it behind your head to support your head, it's a lot more comfortable than a cork block, let me tell you. Okay. I'm always going to suggest some blankets or towels, especially if one of your complaints about yoga is that your knees bother you. Have some towels, have some blankets, pad yourself with those under your knees. But they're good for a lot of other things. They're good for shavasana, to drape over yourself in the cold months because you want to stay warm. They are good to use instead of blocks. If you don't have blocks, you can build up, if you have multiple ones of them, you can build up some height, and they can be used instead of blocks to bring the earth closer to you. So if you're sitting like I am right now, I'm sitting on a cushion. So my knees are lower than my hips. But if you sit right on the ground, use a cushion, okay, and you're sitting like that, and maybe your hips are not quite as open as mine, and you find yourself sitting like this. And that's very, very common. There's nothing wrong about that. A block under your thigh will take care of that. And if you don't have the block, like I said, you can take a bunch of blankets. I'll cue you in practices when things like that are necessary. Okay, so the blankets, if you have a bolster, bolsters are great. I didn't have a bolster for a really, really long time. The first bolster that I bought was a regular bolster, not a yoga bolster. So it was pretty flimsy. I still use it once in a while. But for my birthday a few years back, my family gave me a set of the cushion and the bolster. I highly recommend that. I will try and remember to link that up in the description box below, but I make no promises. The bolster is great. It can be used also instead of blocks. You can sit on it. It can be used sometimes to drape over your legs or your stomach. A little extra weight can feel really nice in some poses. If you don't have a bolster, you can use some pillows. Now, I have some videos, Yoga in Bed, where I show how to use regular bed pillows. If you have firm, like couch pillows, that's even better because these things are filled with buckwheat. So they mold to you, but they're also pretty firm and they've got some heft to them, and that can feel really nice. Okay, so these are the blocks that I suggest you keep near your yoga place. My dog Bandit. And just have them right in hand. Have them available for you. Bandit is probably looking for a treat right now. All right. And now I want to get on to the last bit of this, because this is probably going longer than intended already. Okay, so I'm going to move some of this off to the side, but I will be grabbing them. And I want to talk a little bit about down dog and how to modify down dog in case it feels really uncomfortable for you. So let's go ahead and come to our mat. And of course, you are not warmed up at all, but that's okay. Come into a tabletop position where your shoulders are over your wrists and your hips are over your knees. And the legs are about hip width apart. The fingers are spread really wide so that you can really grip that mat. And go ahead and tuck your toes. And on an inhale, begin to take your hips up towards the ceiling. Really press into
your index finger and your thumb here. That will help take some of the strain off of your wrists, and we'll get into other ways to modify if your wrists are a problem. And breathe deeply. And since we're not warmed up, you might want to pedal out your legs a little bit, bending one knee, straightening the other leg, then bending the other knee, straightening the opposite leg. And that can help just warm you up a little bit. And your gaze is back towards your thighs. You want your ears approximately near your biceps. You don't want to lock out the elbows. And your triceps begin to spin in towards your heart. And that can create a opening sensation through your shoulders. And begin to really lift your kneecaps and begin to activate the muscles in your thighs. And a couple more breaths here. And then let all that go. Come down to the mat. That is your basic down dog. If you do it right, there are a lot of things to think about. But I'd like to give you a few modifications because for some people, whether you're a new yoga practitioner or not, down dog is not a restful pose. And it's really meant to be. So there are things we can do about that. So, okay, come back to your tabletop position. Curl your toes under. Actually walk your knees out a little bit. So this time, take your legs wider. Maybe as wide as the mat. And then go ahead and push through the heels of your hands, gazing back to the thighs. All 10 toes point forward. Fingers are wide. Release your neck and see how this feels. How does this feel for you with your legs wider apart? This can make down dog more accessible for people who have very tight hamstrings. And while we're here, go ahead and begin to take your hands as wide as the mat as well. So if you have really tight shoulders, this might make down dog more accessible for you. You may even want to take your hands to point outward slightly towards the edges of your mat. And notice how that feels. And then let all that go. Go ahead and pause and breathe. So that is another couple of modifications if you have tight hamstrings, if you have tight shoulders. And also remember, the purpose of down dog is not to get your heels to the mat. And you know what? Some days I do, and some days I don't. And it's sometimes just a matter of the day, and sometimes it's a matter of how much I have already warmed up for the pose. Okay, let's see. The next thing. Okay, come to tabletop. This time I want you to come into your down dog, whichever width apart you want your hands and your legs. Curl the toes under, but push your hips back while keeping your knees really bent. And notice when I do that, how straight I am from the crown of my head to my glutes. And that's one of the things we want in down dog. We really want our spine to be long. So if your hamstrings are really tight and you really have problems, bending your knees might be very helpful to you. So try it, see how that feels. Come on down. Grab some blocks. Put them towards the front of your mat. Take your hands just a little bit beneath, or even take them onto, come into tabletop. Place your hands on your blocks. Curl your toes under. Inhale. Hips go back. Now how do you feel? How does this feel? Does this make it easier on your back? Does it make it easier for you to get your heels further down? Does this take some of the strain of the pose out for you? One of the sayings, very, very famous saying from a very, very famous text called the Yoga Sutras, is that yoga should be a steady and easy seat. In other words, if you are huffing and puffing and gripping, then you're not really doing yoga. Yes, it's about challenging yourself, but it also should feel useful to some extent. And the more you practice, the more you'll get an idea for that. Now, if you have problems with your wrists, or if none of that is helping you and down dog still is just not accessible for you, there are still a couple of options for you. One is one of my favorite poses. Go ahead, come into tabletop. And you might want blocks for this one as well. Begin to walk your hands out. And I personally really like this. You can put your hands on blocks to make it a bit more accessible, especially if your shoulders are tight. You can place a block under your forehead, and that can feel very nice too. Now this still puts some pressure on your wrists, obviously, but we're not putting our entire body weight onto our wrists. So this can make it more accessible for a lot of people, especially if you take your hands onto blocks. And press into your palms to come out. Slowly come up and walk your hands back to your body. And for the last modification I'm going to offer you today, because this is already getting pretty long, come on down to your forearms. So your forearms can be just like this. If you'd like, you can interlace your hands and make a fist. So this is going to help a lot, but it's still not an easy thing. Curl your toes under. Inhale, lift your hips back towards the sky or the ceiling. Well, this is really good for your shoulders, actually, and so is puppy pose. This one will take a lot of the pressure out of your wrists. And you'll notice in this pose, I cannot get my heels down to the mat, so that's okay. I actually found this to be much more challenging. This is dolphin pose, if I didn't mention that. Go ahead and release. I actually found dolphin pose to be a lot more challenging than down dog, personally. But it is really good for your shoulders. Like I said, it's if you want to do things like arm balances, headstands, handstands, it's a really nice pose to have in your practice. So, now you know what's coming up this month. Now you know a little bit about why I love props. I probably do another video about that at some point. I've done one in the past. I just think it's so important. People get the idea that props are cheating. Teachers sometimes make them feel like they don't need props when they really do. Nobody knows your body like you do. Nobody. So if you know that you need the prop and a teacher tells you, no, you really don't. Now, sometimes teachers want to challenge you a little bit. And they, if it's a really experienced teacher, you may want to go along with it. But even if it's an experienced teacher, our bodies are different. Our anatomy, our bones are actually different. It's really kind of wild. The angle of our bone that fits into our hip varies from person to person. And that is one reason why we have trouble getting into certain shapes sometimes. So if a teacher tells you, no, you really shouldn't use that prop, unless you really, really trust them, thank them and say, I really prefer to. Thanks. Okay. I really look forward to practicing with you this February. Thanks so much for listening to me. If you want more tips, if you want more community, in the description box is a link to my Facebook group, amongst other stuff. Go ahead and make sure you answer the questions. And I am happy to invite you into the group.
We were small, we were growing, but I do challenges in there that don't come to this channel. I post stuff that doesn't get into the newsletter. So if any of this was interested to you and you want to go deeper, the Facebook group is a good place to be. And I will be 100% clear with you that I am also at a season in my life where I have an elderly mother, and things come up, and sometimes I can't be as active in the group as I'd like to be, but that was one of my goals for this year, to be much more active, and I'm happy to say so far I'm doing well with that. So I invite you to the group. Sorry to talk your ear off. If you enjoy this video, go ahead and click the like button, and if you want to know when new videos are added to the channel, go ahead and click the subscribe and the bell, and have a wonderful day.